Hi, everybody. I'm Neil from the Your Gray Matters podcast. We're glad that you're coming back. We have some serious issues tonight, and we are really thrilled. We have one of our greatest friends to our podcast. Many of you have heard him, Dan McTeague, one of the best people probably in this country. Dan is a former Liberal MP, and he's now the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. He spent 18 years as a member of Parliament for the Ontario riding of Pickering, Scarborough East. Dan, welcome back to our podcast. Thanks for being on today.
Well, Neil, thanks for having me. I was really looking forward to this, and when the offer came, I jumped at it. Now, with summer slightly behind us, I'm starting to think the long haul starts. People can start to get serious, and we have a lot to discuss about what the government is or isn't doing, and where Canada's heading. And some of it, I could say, it's not very good.
I certainly want to know where we're heading, but I wanted to ask you just for a minute because we didn't do this much on the first podcast with you, and I think it's so important. So, how does a former Liberal MP end up leading Canadians for Affordable Energy? Can you tell us about this wonderful group and what you're doing, Dan?
Neil, thank you. AffordableEnergy.ca, Canadians for Affordable Energy, was created a bit of a brainchild of several of us who sort of thought back in 2014, 2015 that, especially after Justin Trudeau took over, we realized that the cost of energy was starting to rise, despite the fact it may have been, dropping elsewhere. It wasn't just, of course, gasoline and diesel, which I had been interested in. It was the cost of electricity and the introduction of renewables and all sorts of policies which seem to be geared towards telling Canadians, oh, you're worried about the climate. You should, as I've said before, you should bed wet over it. Therefore, you should pay for it. Now, I can tell you that this didn't go down very well with guys like myself who've had a 20, 30 years of work in terms of predicting where energy was going to go. But as I said back then, things were getting very bad. I'd worked my own gas site, tomorrowsgaspricing.com, later merged that with Gas Buddy. But I realized that working with Gas Buddy and bingo calling the cheapest gas stations wasn't the way to go about this, especially since in the United States, they were unaware of what was happening in Canada. That is to say, a weaker Canadian dollar, carbon taxes, a bevy of other taxes, and decisions that were going to have a negative impact on our economic future, not to mention driving up the cost of living. So 2018, 2019, I decided no more work in Boston, no more work doing American media. It's time to get back home and put many years as a member of Parliament to work in terms of going after the government and not giving up on where the shortcomings and the dishonesty, frankly, of the net zero green policies were taking Canada in a very, very odd direction that many people could not afford. And today, of course, we have now a Liberal government that wants to walk away from these things, getting rid of carbon taxes, getting rid of potentially EV mandates, getting rid of things like emissions caps, whatever. The reality is that the work is far from done, and we need to continue to hold their feet to the fire, recognizing that a lot of the basis, Neil, on which they've made these suppositions about green energy, ESG, the so-called environmental social governance, and other forms of restriction of our energy, which is pretty much a primary driver of our Canadian economy, had to be exposed, and it has to continue in the battle to take it down, to make affordability, once again, something Canadians can look forward to. It's something they haven't seen for the past decade, whether that be energy or food or pretty much the entire spectrum of the cost of basket of goods and services that we need to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So we're going to talk today on energy, that cost of living, some political shifts that these guys are doing, and a recent shocking move by the Carney government. I know that there's been a lot of them, but I'm talking about in the Middle East. Let's dive right in. So the best thing that you taught me from our last podcast, and it's working, folks, is when to fill up your car to have the best savings. Dan, could you take us through that again? Because I think I've saved probably a couple of $1,000 the last number of months buying gas at a certain time during the day.
Well, I used to think it's because I predicted so accurately gas prices in most cities across Canada that gasoline stations decided to get pretty upset and wanted to make me look bad by throwing away what it takes for them to run their gas stations. Look, on any given day, a gas station is given what's called a rack price, a wholesale price. And for all intents and purposes, on a day like today, mid-September into September, Works out to about 85 cents a liter in places like Ontario, might be as little as 81 cents in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, roughly that. But that number is very transparent. You just have to add the taxes. And of course, at the end of all of that, you come up with a number, usually based on what it takes for a gas station to turn on their pumps. Out of that amount of money, they have to put on what's called a retail margin. So that's, in most cases, because they have to honor credit cards, that's 2 cents a liter, or they have to honor loyalty programs. That could be as much as, well, 7 cents. I did one the other day with my
Hmm.
Link card for Optimum, 7 cents a liter. So now
Yeah.
you're talking 9 cents a liter. And then you have to be able to pay your staff, pay your electricity to turn on the pumps. What's happened is that gas stations say, yeah, we'll do that from 12 midnight all the way until 5 o'clock the next afternoon, and we'll make sure we cover all of our costs. But after 5, we want to get a little cute and we want to change the numbers, so we're going to drop it that 8, 9, 10 cents a liter. We're actually going to lose a little bit of money for a short period of time. On the end of the day, it comes out as a wash, especially if you go in and buy a bottle of pop, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. I mean, that's how they make their money, through the small or large convenience stores and selling whatever they can sell. The reality is that gas stations have a magical formula, and it's very, very simple. You and I talked about it. Never, ever, ever buy your gasoline anywhere in Canada, especially in major cities, before 6 p.m. If you do so, well, you're just forking over, $5 to $10 every time you fill up. And if you're one of those that has to fill up once, twice a week, that can amount to several hundred, if not thousands of dollars of savings a year.
And it is true because I've noticed, I really have noticed, sometimes you'll see 10, I've seen as much as 15 cents a liter drop after 6 p.m. at night. I have found it amazing. And so there's a good tip for you, everybody. Now, the price of gas. The price of gas is down a bit, but it's been going back up. And I remember you taught us about legitimately what happens when we change gas during the seasons, winter, summer, and you touched that if you want. But what the hell's going on with the price of gas? Because it has been going up. I don't think it's just because the kids stopped their summer holidays.
Well, there's a bit of politics in that, because Mark Carney, in order to win the election, had to finally concede that what the Dan McTeagues of this world have been saying, that Canadians would hit a point where they could no longer afford weather taxes. I'm sorry, carbon taxes, that they wouldn't be willing to pay 20 cents a liter, which is what they were going to on the 1st of April. So many thought it was an April Fool's joke. They dropped it 20 cents a liter. So suddenly we saw prices drop dramatically right across the board from coast to coast, save and except in the maritime provinces, because they have regulated prices. You have to wait until the bureaucrats decide to wake up and change a few, keystrokes on their computer to make the differences. I'm saying that because the Maritimes should have open, transparent, free market pricing, unlike pretty much the regulated prices that they have and they tolerate, and usually get ripped off. Nevertheless, so what's happened is that there should have been a 20 cent a liter decrease. But I got a lot of calls this summer saying, Dan, this time last year, I'm pretty sure I looked at my receipts. I was paying $1.48, $1.49 here in the GTA in Toronto. Now it's $1.43, but I thought, this thing was supposed to save me 20 cents a liter. I'm only saving 5 cents. And they're right. All of our gasoline is priced based on the New York market. In other words, the New York Mercantile Exchange. Some people call it the New York Harbor. And this time last year, prices ex tax on the US market was $2 a gallon. So not a bad price. This year, 2.30. So that 30 cents a gallon multiplied by a weak Canadian dollar, a dollar made weak by the fact that you and I love blocking pipelines in this country and preventing any kind of energy from getting to the rest of the world, so they have no interest in buying Canadian currency. Because it takes 138 pennies to buy a US dollar, that 30 cent a gallon difference turns out to about 10 or 11 cents a liter. But someone's going to say to me, well, hang on a second, I get that, but we're still off 20 cents. Well, the market's up. And more importantly, what you have to look at is the second carbon tax has been put in, the clean fuel regulation. No one talks about it. As, oh, didn't we get rid of it? No, you didn't get rid of it. And I've warned people for 5, 6 years, it's coming in two forms. One, higher ethanol and gasoline. Two, it's going to hit 20 cents a liter by 2030. That's where refiners have to reduce their emissions. And to do that, since the technology doesn't exist, we're not talking emissions. We're not talking pollution. We're talking CO2. The same people who go out and demonize CO2, the same ones who refuse to prevent themselves from exhaling. Because when I exhale, it's CO2. But nevertheless, I digress. Without CO2, without water, without oxygen, life dies on this planet. So what the government's done is it's allowed 5 cents a liter already to be stuffed on the cost of gasoline, and that 10-cent difference that we saw from the United States year over year accounts for 15 of that 20-cent difference. And of course, it was 148 last year; it's 143 this year. There's the other 5 cents. So, yeah, congratulations, Canada. I mean, having a weak Canadian dollar because you like blocking pipelines and you voted all the albozos out there to continue the green policies of preventing us from getting our product to market. Well, it takes 139 pennies to buy a US dollar. Why is that important? Each and every single day, going back 25, 30 years, I have to calculate the Canadian exchange rate. It was 137 today, 138.32. Yesterday it was 138.16. The Canadian dollar has weakened a little bit. Why is that important? Every commodity is priced usually in US terms. If we have a weak Canadian dollar, it means we pay more, even the commodities made here at home. So in the case of gasoline, Neil, the biggest tax on gasoline is the weak Canadian dollar. It costs you and I 24 cents a liter because it's not on par with the US greenback. If we sold oil, we sold natural gas, and we weren't so busy doing the chicken dance with our elbows up, attacking Trump and everyone else, and paying no attention to the fact that we could have sent these products to the rest of the world, we wouldn't be paying such a high price. No wonder the purchase power of Canadians has been so severely eroded by government policies that have really attacked, whether they like it or not, and undermined affordability for energy.
And it's horrible. I was actually at my local grocery store not too many weeks ago, and I am not embellishing, folks. A woman, probably in her early 70s, standing at the meat counter with tears running down her face, exclaiming that now she can't even afford hamburger. And she was so frustrated, she was actually crying in the grocery store. It is outrageous. The cost of food, of course, the Liberals will not talk about it in question period. They run from that question. They talk about, you ask about food, they talk about housing. You ask about food, they talk about the fact that they don't like pipelines. I mean, it's unbelievable that people are shifting to food banks, and the food banks are crying out for food. It's insane in a country like this, Dan.
Yeah, fourfold increase since COVID. So there is something wrong. The wheels are off the economy,
Yeah.
and people want to continue to think that they can get governments to, I don't know, to pay their wages, to have a guaranteed wage, to have free dental, to have free everything. The problem with asking for free stuff is that you have to be able to generate some kind of revenue or wealth. And since we're doing none of the above, and we have now the totality of impacts from the US government, one of the reasons food prices are up. Speak to Sylvain Charlevoix, my good colleague who's done a lot of work with me on the carbon taxes, the food professor. One of the main reasons, not always, retaliatory tariffs. Those tariffs are coming back to boomerang and hit us right in the head. But again, you love your elbows up. Good thing they're up because there's nothing left in your pocket, not that you can reach for it.
Exactly. Well, hopefully, at some point we'll have conservative policies in place so that we can get our energy moving, get out of the ground, create wealth for this country. I know that the Carney Liberals now are trying to look like the conservatives. They're starting to get rid of some of the old liberal guard. They're running the other way. Even Jill Bowe is running the other way. And all I can say is, if we're going to have conservative policies, why don't we just have the Conservative Party? But that's just me. But tell us just a little bit more. How are these energy costs impacting Canadian households, Dan? Like, let's talk a little more specifically, if you can. The government has policies that disallow us to move energy and our natural resources in our country, our wealth, the wealthiest country in the world we should be. So how come that lady can't afford hamburger?
Well, that lady can't afford hamburger because the value of the Canadian dollar, the economy is very weak, and we are price takers. Now, there's some of the fact that some of our good meat is being sent to the other parts of the world. There is demand for Canadian beef, but when Canadian food costs or feed costs for farmers goes up, they just get rid of the herd. They don't actually stick around to watch, their potential profits get frittered away. So a lot of these meats are not coming in from other parts of the world, but it has a lot to do with the fact that, in the case of meat, as in the case of any other commodity, whether it's imported or not, we're taking a 20% haircut. And we're also at the same time seeing a massive increase in demand for food. Well, look, let's be very blunt about this. When you go from 36 million Canadians in 2015 up to 41 or 42 million Canadians, you increase the population by 15% in such a short time frame. It adds to the totality of demand. That's not work for housing because they can't afford it, but
Yeah,
everyone wants food.
exactly.
We have to eat it 3 times a day. And so what we're seeing here is a greater pressure on a restricted economy in which we've sort of said we're going to keep all of these regulations in place. We're going to make it tough for farmers and processors to make their food in this country. And as a result, the only people who are going to win out here are those who have deep pockets. And increasingly, we're seeing that that is not it's not viable.
Yeah.
You've spoiled the future of this country. And again, it wasn't once, it wasn't twice, it wasn't 3 times, but 40 to 45% of you out there voted Liberal for the fourth time. You made a calculated effort to get these people back into power because you didn't like Pierre Poilievre. He was too angry. Well, how's that anger when your stomach's empty? Because I can tell
Yeah.
you, as a Liberal MP of 18 years, 45 years in the trenches, that was never the Liberal Party. It was never a cult. And you voted for a cult. I've warned you, if I couldn't vote for them, how good a name could you have voted for them?
Well, hopefully it'll be a short-lived minority government as far as I'm concerned. Dan, I'm also in the mortgage business, as most of our viewers know. I've had calls that I've never had before. People my age in their 70s, they want to access the equity in their house. It used to be to take the family on a trip or to have fun or whatever they want to do. I've had people calling just to say, I can't handle the debt anymore. And I've had more than one person call to say, I'm just trying to avoid going into the food bank. What the hell? People
I
work their whole lives in this country. And I'm not saying everybody, I don't want to embellish, but the idea that anybody has to go to a food bank, let alone a senior who's worked for this country their whole lives, is insane. I wanted to ask you, Dan, too, the carbon tax debate. Okay, let's be clear. The carbon tax consumer one, they say is gone, but that had to be legislated. I don't think it's been legislated. Couldn't it come back at any time, or am I wrong?
No, it's still there. It's just been
Yeah,
suspended. It's all it's been. I mean, whether they bring it back or not, depends on the popularity and whether or not people suddenly decide that carbon and climate change and other frivolities based on faux science are worth more than recognizing that they can make ends meet. We've had it good for in this country for the past 10 years, 15 years. We've had a pretty solid economy that weathered a few storms. But you had to go back to my time when I was a member of Parliament in the 1990s when guys like Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien and the caucus worked very hard in cooperation with the provinces and many stakeholders to ensure that we got our financial house in order. That we have racked up the debt that we did and that we continue to spend like drunken sailors and import people who frankly do not have and cannot make a contribution to Canada yet and go well beyond what most wise bureaucrats and analysts have told us in terms of the amount of people we could absorb into this country, to borrow as heavily as we did, to print money as we have done, to destroy our manufacturing and our attack our energy sector, taking away 10, 15, 20% of the GDP, while at the same time eclipsing the ability for young people to find work this summer. The totality of the damage of the ideology of the narrative that does not belong to Canada and should never have been applied to Canada is now starting to become pretty evident. And of course, you talk about 19, back in the early days, this young man, a little picture of him here, that would be in August of 1981. That would be Dan McTeague working in Parliament Hill. And that little picture is in front of the Justice, in front of the Confederation building, for those who are familiar with it. I had a call around that time from my father saying, it's 22% interest rates, Dan. I have to shut down my construction company. You think you can help the family out with the wage you're making up there because it's getting bad. I saw this before, Neil, and I'm seeing
yeah,
it again, regrettably, and it has a
yeah.
lot with a lack of understanding by politicians who want to give out more than we can possibly afford.
And now it's starting to drive people, God only knows, to the worst places. It's insane, and it is also it's worse than disgraceful. This is not what the Canadian government is supposed to be doing to Canadian people. I want to ask you something too, Dan. We got rid of the consumer carbon tax, we think. I'm just going to say we think. But we do have the industrial carbon tax 2, as I call it. Aren't these costs someday going to end up in the bank in the hands of consumers anyways? Isn't it sort of the same thing?
You're paying actually two other carbon taxes. The one I mentioned earlier, the clean fuel regulation, the clean fuel standard. A lot of people seem to forget that's out there, but it's there and it's going to 20 cents a liter, it's already 5 cents a liter. And you have something called OBPS, output based pricing system. And it's basically an industrial carbon tax. It says if you produce emissions, you have to cap them or buy carbon credits. So that carbon credit, you have two choices. You either pay for it and pass it on to your consumers, or you go to business. But I think a lot of businesses are actually choosing the other avenue, which is to get the heck out of Dodge, leave Canada,
Yep.
and
Yep.
sell products into Canada. And so, if that's cool by people, most of them don't even know this exists. But again, their elbows are still up. Well, careful you don't hurt yourself as you fall down economically.
So we are learning about the net effect on our economy of what the Liberals have been doing. And quite frankly, in my opinion, as I said before, I don't know who these guys are, but they are not the Liberal Party of Canada. They haven't been for 10 years. It seems to me that actually they seem to be wanting more and more in their policies to actually destroy our freedoms, our democracy, our ability to drive the car that we like. And I have a question for every single Liberal MP. Who the hell gave you the right to tell us what kind of cars we can drive? Since when is that the job of a government? It's
It's the job of people.
outrageous.
Yeah, it's the job of the government that believes that it can do no wrong and that people are willing to be, cheated into or bribed into or goaded into voting for them out of a sense of fear. I mean, look, 2015 was dope. 2019 was climate. 2021 was COVID. 2025 was orange haired man bad. Canadians have to really pick up their game and become more mature. This is the way their parents and grandparents were when I ran, when they were a lot smarter and weren't going to be cajoled by these kind of these kind of uh, narratives. By the way, promulgated by a lot of press that's paid for by the federal Liberals, promulgated by a lot of opinion leaders who are paid for by the Liberals, promulgated by a lot of so-called educators who are paid for by the Liberals. Everything we have here has an angle. This is like a gang, a bunch of gangsters looking over a stash of money, both current and future, and saying, well, we'll spend it all and do exactly what we want. And we will ensure that anybody who attacks us or questions us is treated as if they, and malign them as if they are people who are out of step with reality. The country cannot continue down this parasitic road of trying to be all things to all people and be cool and trendy and follow the World Economic Forum, the ESG, the DEI. We have poisoned the nation, destroyed its valuable institutions and traditions, and we're about to reap an extraordinarily bitter harvest on a level I have not seen in my lifetime, at least going back to 1981.
Yeah, and I have to say, Dan, you touched on something that's been bothering me. In fact, I've discussed it with some friends of mine who are MPs. It's a simple question. Should it not be against the law for for our country, for our government to fund media? Why the hell are we giving money to newspapers and TV stations? And to me, you can't have a democracy if the government can fund the media. And we're certainly seeing right now, live and in living color, exactly what the hell is going on when you do.
Yeah. Well, this isn't Pravda or Izvestia. I mean, you can have arms of the government that have their own views, and we've had that in the past. The Toronto Star for the Liberals, sometimes for the NDP, quite often actually for the NDP, the Globe and Mail, and others more from the conservative side. That's all changed, and what's
Yeah.
changed is not only the lack of sophistication, but I think media has to realize, and the Liberal politicians have to realize, the gig is up. Kids under 55 aren't watching TV anymore. So if they think they can continue down this road of influencing, I got news for them. It's really changed. I don't do a lot of national media anymore, a lot of general media, simply because it's not worth it. They don't care about the price going up or down. They only care about any instant headlines. They can't do the research or the investigations that they used to do in the past. They don't have the funds because they don't have the advertising. But beyond that, now the only source of real funding comes from the federal government, and that is unacceptable because they often are seen as acting as Praetorian Guard to to the theme of the day being put forward by the federal Liberals, and the economy and the finances of the country will not be able to hold up. 40 days from now, reality is going to hit everyone, including the media, but also I think those who for a long time said, let's have a free ride. Yeah, we might have employment going down because we're all bad policies, but we'll hire a shit pile, part of expression, of federal civil servants to make up the difference. It can't work. It's over. The gig is up.
Dan, I'm finding as we're doing this podcast, I thank so much for doing it. We do have to remember, though, that we have, and I'm sure that you agree, that's why we're doing this. We have a strong, resilient, beautiful country that is hopefully temporarily under the control of a group of people who don't like a strong, beautiful, resilient Canada. But we have all that it takes. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the technology. We just have to get people thinking about why they can't afford Hamburger. And I know that our friend Pierre likes to say we have to defund the CBC. I'm not really wanting to talk about that. My thing is we need to defund government money from going into the media, full stop, period. That's my opinion. And I hope when we get a different government, they'll at least look at this, because there's something wrong with the fact that people cannot trust the media in this country. It's outrageous. Dan,
Perception, reality.
yeah, well, but the reality is that people can't afford Hamburger,
Exactly.
and that's ridiculous. Okay, one last topic for tonight, Dan. This one's a bit personal. It's hard and it's frustrating. I'm a Jewish person. People have heard me. I was on with Dan Muse a few weeks ago about this. I'm a Jewish man. My grandfather is born and bred here. I'm 71 years old, and 3 of my 4 grandparents were born in Canada. These people were builders of this country. And only now in the last 10 years, especially the last few years, have a lot of religions seen a change in attitude from this government. But the Jews are getting whacked. Jewish people are not feeling safe. They're not feeling wanted. And recently, MP Anthony Housefather, who's a Liberal MP, tried to get his Liberal colleagues to sign a bill that would basically talk about the outrageousness of growing anti-Semitism in this country. And out of that government, only 18%, only 31 Liberal MPs would sign a document calling for the end of growing anti-Semitism. The Liberals, believe it or not, folks, would not sign it. The Conservatives came out the next day with their own message, and 100% of people in the Conservative MPs signed it. I'm not saying this for biased reasons, because obviously I prefer Conservatives. I'm saying, what the hell happened to the idea that a government of Canada is supposed to protect and be aware of the needs of every person, every citizen in this country? Apparently, the Liberals are opposed to that idea. Then we add on this new wonderful idea of the Carney government. By the way, just the day before the Jewish New Year, so that they could point fingers, I will not specify which finger, at the Jewish community, as they announced a recognition for a Palestinian state. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I'm personally against Palestine or a peaceful resolution to this terrible situation that we're having. But the truth is that the Carney government just recognized and patted on the back a group of people who are terrorists, who are causing terrorism, who are causing the challenges in that part of the world. Absolutely. They've not released the hostages. And not only that, they put that same finger right up to our closest allies and best friends in the world, the United States of America. And we are going to hear about that too. So, Dan, I'm annoyed, I'm frightened, and I'd like to know your take on this whole ridiculous situation that we're in.
Well, the two hats I wear, the first one is to wish my Jewish friends a happy and festival of Rosh Hashanah, and of course Yom Kippur to follow, Simchat, and right up until the middle of October, celebrations and festivities. The fact that this should happen on this time, as much as Mark Carney wants to suggest it, is not based on any logic. It is based simply on the fact the liberals are trying to win over indelibly the Muslim vote in Canada. Now, that's not a small vote. It's what, 300,000 in my time, 400,000 to 2 million. So they see this as a block opportunity. But most nations have said no to this. And people who've written in foreign affairs, I worked in foreign affairs for this country, represented the diplomatic end of our country when it came to consular affairs, which I was in charge of from 2003 to 2006. I can say with absolute knowledge that uh, you can't recognize state recognition cannot be given to another state that doesn't exist or for which there has been dispute as to who actually owns it. That land is Israel's, and it was under the Palestinian mandate from 22 to 48. If you want to go to the history, taken over by the Jordanians in 48, they had to get pushed out in 67. So it's very much Israel's. But this is really about a government willing to more more heinously support a regime between the Palestinian Authority. I mean, you have Gaza on the one side and you have the West Bank on the other. The two do not like each other. Fatah group, the old one from Yasser Arafat, and of course Hamas, a deadly, terrorist, vicious organization. And what Mr. Carney has done, and what his colleagues, his phony friends on the left in Britain and Australia, and to a lesser extent Belgium, have done is basically given a gift to the terrorists and said there are rewards for what you're doing, no matter how you see this. At the end of the day, you're given something that should not have been conferred in the first place. Canada had no business doing that, and I suspect that the repercussions will be significant. And thankfully, it will be coming from the United States, saying all the more reason not to want to do a proper trade deal with Canada, because you will work behind our back to do all sorts of ridiculous things and reverse what has been a very solid diplomatic, strong position that Canada takes. It was very defensible. This is not defensible by any legislative or legal precept of international law. And therefore, Mr. Carney is simply playing to the left, the Muslim vote. And that's not, get away from that. As a Christian, I can't sort of say back and say, hey, no problem. I saw what happened to the Yazidis by the same fanaticism we saw in the Middle East. We know that, Jews may be the ones on target by some of these fanatics, radicals, but Christians are also not very far behind. And many of them have lost their lives pushing and renouncing what the fanatics have done. We've seen the Middle East, where Christianity used to be very strong in that region, completely wiped out. So I think a discussion has to take place. And don't take my word for it. The largest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. And the president of Indonesia made the same declaration at the UN, saying, we can't coexist unless Israel has the right to exist, and there should be no formal recognition of Palestine. If Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, all the surrounding nations to Israel are not recognizing Palestine as a country, why the hell are we? I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Very devious prime minister and a gang of people who are very much along the lines of where they've been for the past 10 years. Upend everything. Nothing has any value. And that's why Canadians feel lesser Canadian today than they did over the past few years.
And to be fair to our Muslim community in Canada, not everybody's agreeing with this either. There's a lot of anger in the community there too. This is just a bad policy play added on to the fact that the Trudeau government put a military embargo against our only ally in the Middle East, who's the state of Israel. And I've feared for a long time, even before Carney came in, that based on our geographical position in Canada being on the northern flank of the US and Russia being on the northern flank of Canada, that at some point the US is going to say enough. They've had enough. And it's tariffs. And I hope it's nothing else. But I'll tell you, if I'm in the US and the US is responding already to what's happened, I'm not allowing this kind of a country on my northern border. That got to do something about it. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm certainly embarrassed by the whole thing, Dan. It's outrageous. And North America could be the strongest place in the world, helping the whole world. And our government seems intent that that will not happen.
Yeah, you can
It's
imagine what
shocking
would
to me.
happen to Canada, Neil, if a country, say in the Middle East, decided they were going to recognize Quebec as a country. The
Yeah.
conniption would be
Yeah.
massive. It's okay to do it this way, but you can't do it the other way. It's a two-way street, especially for a country that used to be a middle power, now punching well below its weight. And we're
Yeah.
sinking quickly. Don't be surprised that on the way down, you get kicked even further. But remember, and Neil, we and I may differ on this. Kenny, I saw them. You and I knocked on doors, saw those people. Oh, they were very proud of voting Liberal and for mediocrity in government and recklessness. They wanted to see it again. They were looking for an excuse. I have very little sympathy for these folks, but I can tell you what they've done is a disservice, and they're our neighbors. They live among us. I've often suggested the best thing I can do is go out and buy some paper bags, offer to every one of them to wear one because they should be ashamed of their voting patterns and what has given Canada a lesser nation with an outlook that is far more tense and dark than it's ever been in the time I've been on this planet.
Yep. And I know that we have a great country. We have everything that we need. I do believe that we have strong Canadians who will be reminded of what we have and reminded that countries learned in the big wars. Canadians don't like to get upset or go to war, but if we do, you do not want to mess with us. Canadians are strong and patriotic, and it's going to come back, Dan. It's going to come back in a big way, God willing, soon in the next election. Dan McTeague, you're a blessing to us all. We are so lucky to have you on the Your Gray Matters podcast. We hope that you'll come back again. And ladies and gentlemen, whether you liked what you heard today or you didn't like what you hear today, or if you have questions and comments, don't be shy. Send them to us. Jason gives you a great way to do this. Please speak your mind. Ask the questions. Don't live in a little box, especially people my age, boomers. Or do you want this kind of terrible stuff going on for your grandkids? Sorry, but it's time to step up and say it's enough of people trying to destroy our democracy and our freedom in this country. Dan, we'll see you soon. Bless your heart. Thanks for coming on.
Here, here, Neil. Thank you very much for this. Looking forward to the next time.
And we'll see you soon, everybody, on the Your Gray Matters podcast. Thanks for watching. If you found it interesting and you liked it, give us a thumbs up. If you're ready to subscribe, click right here. And if you'd like to see another episode, click right here. Tell a friend. Send us comments. Thanks a lot.